Okay, let's look at loops and conditional statements. In this particular session, we are just looking at the for loop. You look at the while loop in another session. Okay, so you have to display something. You have to execute the command several times, right? Let's say for 1,000 times. It's impractical to do that with your human power, right? You can't be typing. For instance, you want to display this asterisk 10 times. Typing that will be cumbersome, right? So you have to use the for loop. That's the function of the looping. Okay, for loop and while loops have their differences, right? For loops are used when you know when to end. Okay, here we want to end at 10, but while loops are used when we don't know our end. Okay, so while loops have its advantages, for loops have their advantages too. So we use them at different instances. All right, now here focusing on the for loop, it's quite simple. Okay, it's quite simple. So with a for, that's the syntax to use the for loop. You write for, then you bring your loop index. It's not always that it's supposed to be I. You can put any other alphabet there. Okay, we are choosing to use I in this particular instance. So for your loop index, I is equals to starting from 1. Increase yourself plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, 10 times, right? We could have let our loop increase itself plus 2 till it reaches 10 by just putting this command. Well, let's come back to our original. Now, within the for loop, look at the for loop and look at the end. Within that, we see display, right? Shortened to disp. We want to display the asterisk, right? The number of times the loop counter will count till it reaches 10 to stop. Now let's go over this again. For I equals to 1, start from 1. Increase yourself plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. When you get to 10, stop. Anytime you increase yourself plus 1, do what is inside the for loop. Anytime you increase yourself plus 1, do what is inside the for loop. When you reach 10, stop. Then end. That is how we write down for loop. So note this syntax down. Take your pen and paper and note something down. So let's try to run the for loop first. I think let's cut the conditional statement so it will not run. Let's cut that part off and let's run only the for loop to see the results. So here you have it. The asterisks have been printed how many times? 10 times. Okay, because they are following the for loops loop counter. Okay, loop counter is not anything, it's just counting from 1 to 2 to 3. So there's other variations you can try, but for the sake of this video, when you are done with it, you can do some 1 or 2 research. You can use the documentation. Okay, you can use the doc command to search for the other ways of varying this for loop usage. Now let's look at this. Conditional statement. So for conditional statements, there are statements that are based on some condition. Anytime you see if, then we want some condition to be met before we continue or proceed. That's the function of conditional statement. If the car is white, buy it. Otherwise, go to the next shop. If the car is white, buy it. Otherwise, go home. Now, let's look at line 7. Num, which is our variable, it's not anything strange. It's a variable we created. It's equals to Randy. You are calling the function Randy and you are giving the argument 100. Now, what is Randy doing? Randy is just coming to create a random number between 1 and the argument you put. Randy is coming to create a random number between 1 and 100 in this instance. So it could create 2, 3, 4, 99, between 1 and 100. Now, we want to do this. Let's say we are answering a question like this. Create a matrix to generate or create a random matrix with, or let's say create a random scalar. We just want just one number. Create a random scalar. Now, if that number, okay, is lesser than 34, say your value is low. Otherwise, if your number is lesser than 64, say your value is what? Medium. Otherwise, if your number is greater than that 64, print high. Let's look at that. Let's look at 8. If num, right, whenever you create that number from the Randy, that number between 1 and 100 from Randy, it will be stored in the variable num. Look at line 7. We are at line 7. It will be stored in the variable num. Now, what is the value of num? We don't know. It's a random number. If num is lesser than 34, for instance, we had 2, then our code will evaluate to what? Low will be stored in value. After all our conditional statements have been executed, come to line 14, ended. We want to display value or val, which is our value, our current value for the number placed in the num. Okay, now let's look at that. Now, if number is less than 34, assign low to value. Otherwise, so let's assume we had 82. Otherwise, because this is wrong or this is false, this statement will not be executed. The first if statement will not be executed. So the code will run. The code always runs from top to down. The code will run to the else if. Else if the number is lesser than 64, assign medium, the string medium, into the variable val. Let's assume our answer is 84, which means the first statement will be false. It cannot be executed. The second statement cannot be executed. It will be ignored. Else, you have no other option. The last number should definitely be higher than 64. Else, let's say our number was 82. Assign high to value. End. Okay. So you are ending this whole conditional statement. Then you display value. Let's see the outcome of this. It's going to generate a random number. So our number was what? 13. Our number was 13. And it's printed out low for us. How do I get back to this code? It's printed out low for us. Let's go back to the code. So what was happening there? Let's go through this again. We want to print out some value, let's say high, medium, or low, but we want it to be conditional. We want it to be based on some conditions. What's the condition? If the number is lower than 34, bring your mind to line 8. Bring your mind to line 8. If the number, where is the number even coming from? Let's go to line 7. The number is coming from Randy. He's just creating a random number. Then it's stored in num. If the number is lesser than 34, assign low, the string low, to value. If this is not the case, so else if assign what? Else if the number is lesser than 64, assign medium to value. Else if that condition is also not true, then the number is obviously greater than 64, which is a high number. Okay, so we can run this another time. We had 92, which is high. So that is it. The rest is for you to practice. Then let's move on to the next video.